Well, first I think we've got to start with my connection with Nana Bonsu. Berry Edwards, Nana Bonsu, yeah? What was my connection with him to understand what's his contribution been? And so my connection with Berry would be knowing of him when I came back from living in the States here, working out in the community. And then I actually needed some of his guidance and help and started to talk to him, and it'd be late 80s, yeah, about education in England and in Manchester. And he would start telling us about certain, I suppose, situations and difficulties the black community was facing in education. I next sort of had major dealings with him would be around 1989, 1990, because a number of us black teachers got suspended, and I was a black teacher who was suspended. Yeah, we were kind of rough and rugged. And so what Berry Edwards did was he was used to being representing people on tribunals, so he was very legalistic in how he'd argue and knew the sort of game and how to play. So when I was suspended, he came in along with my union representation to be part of my defence. So as a suspended school teacher, usually to get you back, you sort of it's like a court to look at these charges against you. And Berry came in to defend me. And so that was another, of my linkings with Berry, seeing him support a number of the black teachers in the city, because I wasn't the only black teacher who'd been suspended at the time. There were quite a few of us, and it was interesting to say, well, how come so many black teachers were suspended? And Berry or Nana Bonsu came in as our defence. He was one to help defend us. Let me go back a bit. So if you go back to, say, roughly 1991, me and my colleague, friend Paul O'Bonnor, we'd started to, and Devon Brown as well, and some of the poisers, we'd started doing our work in the inner city. We'd started teaching in, say, like Ducie Central High School and roundabout, and started getting involved in the, I suppose, the community politics and what was happening to African Caribbean and youths of African descent. So we then linked with Carmore Road, which meant linking with the West Indian Organising Committee and Berry Edwards or Nana Bonsu. We were looking at ways of positively impacting on the young people. And we thought one way would be to work with the West Indian Coordinating Committee and introduce the martial arts into the Caribbean Centre, so we could start using that as a vehicle to help many of the youths we were working with start to gain a self-discipline and help them all how they handle the cops when you're approached, how they handle the street, or start to get them to really start thinking ahead. And so we came across the West Indian Coordinating Committee in our dealings with operating at Carmore Road and starting trying to work with young people in the area. We didn't necessarily get on, we didn't necessarily get on with, say, the strategies they were employing, because we came along. I'd been living in the States, came back. Another colleague, Paul, who'd been over from Blackburn, came into Manchester, and we didn't necessarily agree with how they had always operated. We were saying, well, look, this is 1990s, this is different time. Our youth are getting this high impact, high information at them. No longer in those days. It has to be a kind of change for this new time. So we had differences with the West Indian Coordinating Committee, and that kind of negative fallout with them ended up very positive, because we said, right, we're out of here. We're going to do things in a different way. We've come with a different philosophy. We said, well, we're born here. It was a certain way they kind of operate within England. But also as martial artists, we had a different way of concept. We said, well, wait a minute. We don't have to operate on how set up this committee, set up to this, and this meeting and that meeting. We said, no, that way has failed. We're going to have to use a new way. So we just used a martial arts concept and said, well, the art of fighting without fighting. We will use that way of operating in the community. And the break meant we had to do that, which ultimately meant we were able to then fly in a totally different way. Yeah. So our knowledge of them, our experience of them wasn't the best as we were trying to do work. However, that led to us having to formulate our own way of operating within the community. So we formulated a company limited by guarantee, so we're going to do it different. We ain't doing it your own way. and we called Kemetic Educational Guidance, which was a Kemetic, the old or original name for ancient Egypt. And with being a private company, limited by guarantee now, is what it was just us two. And we said, well, we're just going to be no big organisation, but guess what? Because of how we operate nationally, we can be very organised when we need to organise. And so our difference with them meant ultimately, Berry later on saw what we were doing, that the way these two young'uns were doing actually was kind of worked to an extent. Yeah? So even though we were kind of not so cool on them, ultimately they saw eventually that there had to be another way of doing stuff, and we just did that. Initially there was a pattern of ways in how I suppose we decided the conferences, and there was a pattern of ways, but what happened was we developed ourselves and started to become kind of bigger, because I was always traveling to the States and interlinking around, not just in England, but about Holland, Denmark, yeah, and places. So as the conferences grew in size and in just towards information with communities about what was actually we were doing, that meant then he changed and again then started to support what we were doing. However, what then happened, with him starting to support, we then started to support Berry in Berry's kind of wanted to establish at Carmel Road like a library resource centre. So we began supporting him in that. I always remember him, this kind of like the Culture Week at Carmel Road, which Berry used to always be running. And to me, Culture Week, it was, if you can imagine, because Black History Month was taken officially in '87 within the UK. But in a sense, I'm like, well, Berry had been doing that from time. Yeah, with his Culture Week. Yeah, he had a week, Culture Week, and would do a lot of historical stuff and stuff around the Americas, Caribbean, and the histories of that time. However, you then officially had Black History Month coming, and you could say, well, it just fell onto what was already happening at Carmel Road, especially with what Berry or Nana Bonsu had been doing anyway for years beforehand. He'd initiated that, well, we're going to have a Culture Week where there's going to be information, entertainment, a spreading of the history of people of African descent. So for me, when Black History Month officially came in, so well, it fell already on ripe ground, because people like Nana Bonsu had already, you know, kind of set the scene there for it to fall and then it to help it mushroom, because he'd already been working the ground already. Well, if we talk about, because of that initial kind of falling out with the West Indian Centre Coordinating Committee, and those saying, well, we're going to go our own way. What we didn't do was we didn't sort of stay in Manchester. Yeah, we didn't sort of just say our operations centre is only going to be here in this city. So we were also strongly involved in Liverpool 8, yeah, in Bristol, St Paul's, yeah, and in Leeds. So when it was us saying, well, our way is going to be different, the art of fighting without fighting, well, there's going to be no boundaries. So we will be running classes on this and that in these cities. So what it meant now was that when it was time for us to organise conferences, big international conferences, even though Kemetic Education Guidance was only two of we already had a national network within the African Caribbean or African descent community. So we could then call on people to say, right, we need to get organised for this 2-day conference. And so we'd have people who would then help willingly from Liverpool, Bristol and Leeds. So we had teams of people, because we were getting up to 600-800 people coming from all over the country and from abroad to the conferences, so we needed people help. But because we'd had a different mindset that we ain't just going to stick in the city of Manchester, we're going to be in those black areas and working. It meant then, when it was time, we had a massive team that could run those conferences. If you look at, I suppose, because of what happened, we had the KEG, like I said, we didn't just say, well, we're just going to stick to doing work around with the African Caribbean Centre. We said, no, we're spread out all over the land. Yeah. So, and also you could say the negative aspects that we have to confront, ain't just in schools, it's in prisons, it's in nurseries, it's in museums, it's in, different, it's like a circular 360. You can't just deal with education, you've got to deal with the police. You can't just deal with police, you've got to deal with social services, to deal with the whole thing. And then there's the, what we call the thought structure, what creates thought. That's the universities. They create the concepts and maintain concepts. So what we did was not just stick, we said, well, we're going to battle in universities. So we'd go and do sessions in different universities and teacher training colleges around the Northwest and actually, no, that way down south. So before we even started the classes, we were used to challenging white establishments, because we went all over the show as teachers or trainee teachers with a lot of information and give sessions and be challenged on it. So by the time we set up the classes in the city, we were already had our teeth cut going up and down the country into whole white areas with information about blackness and culture and history and logic, So what then happened was, because initially our work was just based on working with the children, because we were teachers in the schools. We were just based on working with the kids. However, it was leaky fresh. One day I met him on the train and was talking to him about the work that we did with the children and the history we were trying to infuse them with and help motivate them. Anyway, Leaky Fresh said, look, he used to be on the Out to the Stress rap show, and I'd be invited, would we come on and talk about what we do? So we initially said, no way. Well, go on to the radio and discuss all of this, what we're talking about. Said, nah, sack that. Anyway, 6 months after, we decided we would go on. So basically, for about a year and a half, 2 years, we were regular pundits on this Out to the Stress rap show, which was again spreading information out. We got kicked off eventually when we mentioned the fact that Beethoven was black, and we brought on, so we mentioned it one week, but then the following week on radio show I brought in the evidence, because we've learned to battle the system, you see, you can't just say, you have to say prove it. So brought the evidence, boom. Anyway, the following day we were kicked off the radio show, which was real fun. But what that led to was the classes, because people from the community area came in and demanded that classes are started, and from the classes led to the conferences and lots of other stuff. Nana Bonsu, for a long time, was always somebody who pushed Saturday schools, that Saturday schools are vital, for the black community as such, and would give space make sure there was space for Saturday schools. So for example, during it'd be the late 80s, I at times would teach in the Saturday school for him, that Saturday school, for example, now still continues right to this very day, And recently I was helped out the Saturday school in basically some of the resources and materials and methodology of running it. So even though Nana Bonsu isn't here now, his Saturday school is like kicking even stronger now, because it's as if we know the game better now, So we've built on what Nana Bonsu used to do, and if he saw the Saturday school today, he'd be well proud, because now it's like the structure, it's like, well, they're doing what the structure would like in a sense, however, it's doing it in its own way, but playing the game in that, what do you do with assessment? And a Saturday school, how do you assess the kids? What methods are you going to use for assessment? What teaching strategies are you going to use, to get the information across? How are you going to tune into the learning styles of those children? Because they're not all visual, they're not all audio, or they're not all kinesthetic, they're all different. So a lot of all of that methodology now is now kicking in the Saturday school, which is, so if Barry was about, I'd be real proud of how it's evolved on now, But another vital or very important thing that Barry did, which he wouldn't have talked about when he was doing it, was that once I left the city, he allowed me to use the centre hall every 2 weeks. He allowed me to use that centre hall. And what did he use it for? I used it for the training in martial arts of young African descent or young black males. Some of them who were used to doing door work, some of them who I'd been kind of guiding and watching, and they were street roughnecks, but a bit martially. So I'd actually run sessions there so I could keep an eye on these lads, but also help motivate them in positive ways, and Berry would make sure I had the key to do that. Now that I'd started that, I left the city in '99, but even though I'd left the city, gone, I was out being operating in West Yorkshire, didn't want nothing to do with the city. However, secretly, Berry had me in Carmore Road, teach me these young males the martial arts and just helping them emotionally. Yeah. Also, because I decided at '99 to about 2004, I was doing that. But I thought, well, enough's enough now. I want to completely leave the city. But I thought, well, no, Tai Chi is a mega science, health body science, and it's not usually in the black community. You can go into what I call trendyville areas to learn it. So I thought, you know what? I want to leave the skill of Tai Chi in the black community here. So I talked to Berry, said, yo, Berry, I want to leave Tai Chi. Can I still continue on teaching every 2 weeks so I can teach certain man them and one woman the art of Tai Chi? So Berry said, yes. So you still give me the key so I can continue on from like further, I think a further year teaching there. I'd always tried to encourage Berry to come to the Tai Chi lessons, but he'd pop in occasionally, but not stay, yeah? But that's another vital thing he did, in that he allowed that to happen. And yeah, he allowed it to occur and to be, yeah, that there are people in the black community here now who have the skill of teaching certain Tai Chi. So if you go to Alexander Park on a Sunday morning, usually about 10 or 11 o'clock, Ewan Clark teaches a free class. Well, it was only because of what Berry did. That free class exists there now in Tai Chi at that part, yeah? So that was, again, vital important things. Now with the Saturday school come the bookshop that Berry ran. That was also interconnected with Saturday school, schools, because of the books he was selling, we would then get them into schools. Once I left Manchester and went to West Yorkshire and worked as an inspector, now with the school inspector you have a lot more power, the system gives you a lot more power. So, enough big conferences come on, I'm on the phone to Berry, yo man, we want you up here, get your books, I've booked you in. So I'd get him, he'd come up to West Yorkshire regular and bring all this library stock and whatever and sell to the schools in West Yorkshire. It was great.